Hi, I'm Tim from Revolution Bike Park and welcome to the video. Today we're going to talk about a topic which I think can be a little bit awkward, and I think it's not something that in downhill we are particularly good at covering, and that is injuries. And I get why it's an awkward subject. From my personal perspective, it represents sort of one of the hardest parts of the job that we do here. Whilst we have a very experienced and great crew that are able to sort of handle most things that come up, it's still particularly hard. When you're in a situation where someone's suffering and they're looking at you to relieve their suffering, that is a sort of personally quite difficult thing to experience. Particularly, we're also fairly limited, although we're sort of experienced first aiders and sort of well-equipped first aiders. We don't have the same sort of abilities and capabilities that the professionals do, so we're often sort of just waiting for them to arrive. And then there's the sort of constant anxiety that sort of comes from the fact that, we just never know when that radio is going to go off and there's going to be called to a significant injury that, could be quite a problem. So I thought for those who don't sort of work in the world of downhill, it might be interesting to talk about some of the realities of injuries, at least from my perspective. It's also, I want to just say, because obviously, this is quite a touchy subject at times, I am generalizing a lot in this video. Not every incident will fit the perspective that I'm trying to give, and I'm not trying to sort of claim that what I'm saying here covers all incidents. It's just a sort of general feeling on injuries and how it works in downhill. So one of the most common questions I often get asked is, how often do we see injuries? The short answer I could probably give is most days. There's a lot of variability when it comes to sort of accident frequencies, but on a full day where we've got 120 to 130 riders, we would generally expect to see at least one person that requires some kind of treatment or intervention from us. So in order to clarify, it's probably worth me sort of categorizing, different types of injuries. So there is the sort of what I describe as sort of low impact stuff, the sort of small cuts, bruises, sprains. Obviously these are pretty common, probably happen multiple times a day, and more often than not probably don't even get reported to us. When I talk about the sort of most days, sort of one a day, I'm talking about the mid-tier stuff. This is things like sort of broken collarbones, dislocations, concussions, sort of larger lacerations, fairly potentially serious injuries, but fairly common, unfortunately, in the world of downhill. The next category I'd sort of describe as sort of the ambulance stuff. This is where we're getting into sort of the fairly big stuff. This is like long bone breaks, broken legs, arms, that sort of thing. Hip, pelvis injuries, internal bleeding, those kind of injuries. This kind of big stuff is fortunately pretty rare. It varies a lot, but maybe once every month or two we might expect to see something like that. The final category is what I would describe as sort of life-changing stuff. Mercifully, in the world of downhill, this is extremely rare. It can happen, and it's something that everyone who rides, particularly at sort of the higher level of riding that we offer here, you need to come to terms with it and you need to sort of be aware of it. But it's rare enough that I don't think you should live in sort of fear of that. It's just something you need to take into account when you engage in these kind of activities. So I said, frequency varies a lot. So, the next sort of question is, when do these accidents kind of happen? By their nature, accidents are pretty random. They can happen at any time, but there are certainly some patterns that we've sort of seen over the years. The weather can play a big role in sort of frequency and types of injuries that we see, but not necessarily in the way that people might expect. Essentially, the wetter, slipperier and worse conditions are, the less injuries we'd expect to see. When the sun comes out, the trails dry out, our accident rate can triple or even quadruple. Whilst this might seem a little bit counterintuitive initially, the reason's pretty simpler. It's easier to go fast when it's dry. There's a pretty direct correlation between how much skill it takes to go fast and how likely people are to have an accident. In dry, people are more confident, will push their speed more, and if you have a crash at high speed, you're far more likely to get injured than if you have a crash, at slow speeds. In the heart of winter, when it's raining and it's muddy, people are more reserved in their riding, and whilst they probably come off the bike more often, most of these crashes are going to be at slower speeds, and barring kind of getting unlucky, it's not going to result in any kind of significant injuries. Again, slightly counterintuitive maybe, but the easier the track is, the more likely it is we'd expect to see accidents on those tracks. The Reddit freeride, for example, sees way more injuries than a track like Farside does, even taking into account the higher popularity of the freeride track. For most of us, and I'd very much put myself in this category, when you're going down the Farside, your brakes on, you're doing everything you can to try and slow down as you sort of traverse the sort of steep terrain. So if you have a crash, it's likely to be at pretty slow speeds. And you're not going to be having those sort of high-speed impact. If you look at a pro-level rider, there's a sort of classic video of G riding Farside from several years back. They can hit those kind of tracks at the same kind of speed that most of us are hitting the freeride track. But given their high level of skill and ability, they're able to sort of manage those speeds and obviously reduce the chance that they're going to come off. In contrast to that, on the freeride, if you want to hit 25 miles an hour, the only real skill you need is to sort of let go of your brakes for a few seconds, and you'll probably accelerate up to that kind of level. And obviously, if you're going to crash at those kind of high speeds, it doesn't matter if you're hitting, one of the biggest jumps in the park or you're riding on the fire road. The likely outcome is going to be an injury. This is part of the reason why you may have noticed our sort of staff parroting the line, take it easy on your first few run. We do this because we know how easy it is to go fast on freeride and things like that, particularly when you're sort of a little bit excited, you're out for a great day's riding with your mates, you're raring to get on trail, you set off, you put a couple of cranks in, now you're doing 25 miles an hour. And if you come into a jump and you slightly misjudge, say, the angle or steepness or something like that on it, if you do that at 5 miles an hour, the likelihood is you're going to have a bit of a weird wobbly landing and you're going to learn a lesson about that jump. If you do that at 25 miles an hour, the likelihood is your day is going to be over because you're going to go over the bars and we're going to be picking you up. I think a lot of people maybe in their mind right now will probably be thinking, well, but what about vision and 50-1? You're sort of saying that far more likely to see crashes and injuries on the sort of easier tracks, but those tracks, surely you see injuries on them. And the answer is no, not particularly. For the same reason we talked about, the kind of riders that are hitting those tracks are very highly skilled. Nobody's looking at 50-1 and thinking, oh, this is a good beginner track, this is where I can give myself a chance to learn how to jump. The only people hitting that are very high skills who are sort of very good at being able to sort of assess the features, assess the trail, the conditions, the bikes themselves, and make sort of those sort of reasoned decisions as to whether or not it's suitable for them. And if you go down that road, you don't generally have a lot of accidents. That being said, and I will caveat this pretty strongly, obviously those trails are real serious business, and although accidents are fairly rare on them, if they do occur, they tend to be of the more serious nature, just given the scale of the jumps, some of the speeds you'd be travelling at, things like that. So they are no joke, but like I say, mercifully, it's relatively rare that we'd expect to see someone coming off on those trails. Again, I'm trying to be really careful about how I explain my perspectives here, and I wanted to be really clear that I'm talking about statistics here. I'm talking about averages, not reality. Reality is accidents can happen anywhere. And I'm not in any way trying to imply that any particular track is safer than any other track. I'm purely sort of talking about the sort of statistics of where we'd expect to see accidents. Now, I'm also not trying to imply that anyone who sort of has ever had an accident on a bike is some kind of reckless, inexperienced rider. Far from it, anyone at any level can have a crash. Again, just statistically, the amount of people travelling at high speed on a easier track will be more so than on a sort of more difficult track. So, like I say, you would expect to see the place where more experienced riders cluster to be where you'd see more accidents. So essentially what I'm sort of trying to get to from all this is that, the best way to reduce your chance of having an accident or crash is to follow the old look before you leap adage. And, always treat your first few runs as track walks, regardless of your experience, regardless of your familiarity with the trail. Things can change all the time. Give yourself a chance to warm up, check your gear, check the conditions, check the trail, and from there you can build your speed sort of confident that you know what's coming ahead of you, and you'll know that you'll be able to react appropriately to all the features. The other important way that you can protect yourself is with, well, essentially protection gear. I've been being the main first aider at this park now for around 10 years, and I genuinely can't express strongly enough to you how important protection gear. At the park here, we mandate a full face helmet and knee pads. Personally, I'd like to expand that to include body armor, but to be honest, at this stage, so many people don't wear body armour that I think it would be quite difficult for us to enforce that sort of across the board, but we do strongly recommend that you wear body armour when doing any of this kind of riding. And I think it's important to understand a little bit about why wearing protection gear is so important. There's no doubt that in a major sort of crash/incident, protection gear can make a huge difference in the sort of types of injuries you get. However, I don't think that's the primary benefit that most people will get from their protection gear. As I said sort of earlier, mercifully, these kind of major incidents are, I don't really need to touch wood now with the park being closed, but they are fairly rare. So whilst you will get some benefit if it ever unfortunately happens to yourself, that's probably not the main thing that you're going to get out of it. The main benefit you're going to get is that protection gear stops small incidents becoming big injuries. And trying to explain what I mean by that, let me sort of talk you through a bit of a scenario. So let's say you're riding down a pretty basic trail, pretty flat, a few roots and rocks, maybe something like the bottom of main line. You're taking it pretty slow, and you go to turn a corner, your front wheel washes out on a route. At this point you're barely moving, you're not exactly traveling at great speed, but as the bike sort of slips away from you, you're not sort of able to stop yourself. You fall sideways, and in the track there's a sort of partially buried rock, and you put your kneecap onto the edge of that rock. Now with a decent set of knee pads on, how that's going to probably play out is you're going to pick yourself up, you're going to pick your bike up, you're going to ignore your mate behind you who's laughing at how crap a rider you are, and you're going to carry on to the bottom. And later you're going to enjoy the rest of your day, and then later on when you get home and your partner says to you, how was your riding day, you're not even going to remember that incident to mention it. Now let's rerun that scenario but with a bare knee. On hitting that rock, even from a standstill, you're likely to do significant damage. Your mate ain't going to be laughing at you now. He's going to be rushing up to the uplift road to try and flag down one of the vehicles. They're going to get on the radio down to the bottom, and we're going to send up the medics to come see you. We're going to do our best to make you comfortable in that position, because without pain relief, it's unlikely that we're going to be comfortable moving you, so we're going to call in the professionals. Might take a little bit of time, but eventually the sort of heroes in green are going to turn up. They're going to drug you up, they're going to package you up, they're going to ship you down to the bottom, into the ambulance, and off you go to Shrewsbury. At some point later on, your partner's going to probably come meet you at the hospital. You're going to sit down with the consultant. He's going to explain to you the rounds of surgery you're going to need to put your knee back together, and he's going to discuss with you the likely mobility issues you're going to have over the long run. 30, 40 years from now, you'll be sat with your cheeky grandkid asking you why granddad limps every time it's cold. That's the difference it makes. Okay, maybe I'm being a little bit dramatic with that story, but hopefully you get the gist of it, So in short, wear your protection gear. If not for your own safety, then wear it to reduce the chance of ruining your day's riding. Or, for example, your mate's day's riding, because it's probably going to be them who has to end up taking you to hospital. Like I say, the kind of protection gear you can get now, it's really good, and it does a really great job of stopping those little silly incidents becoming a long-running painful injury. Anyway, it'd be remiss of me when talking about protection gear not to mention Leatt. This is not a sponsored video, however, Leatt has been supporting the park for several years by providing protection gear for the rentals. Now there's lots of great options out there when it comes to protection gear, but I must admit having a bit of a soft spot for Leatt. When we were looking for a partner for protection gear at the park, Leatt was my first choice, and I sought them out sort of deliberately. It wasn't them coming to us. Like I say, lots of companies out there that sell some really, really good protection gear, and as long as you're buying decent quality stuff, you'll probably be fine with all of it. However, a lot of companies that do protection gear, in my mind, kind of also do protection gear, i.e. they're a brand that saw an opportunity to go into the market for protection gear, and that kind of was their route into the market. Leatt, on the other hand, is a protection company first. Whilst they do sell loads of products at this point, at their core, they are dedicated solely to reducing injuries. The company actually began when the founder, Dr. Chris Leatt, witnessed a death at a motocross event. He was an experienced surgeon with a history in, I think, among other things, sort of orthopedics and neurosurgery, which I believe makes him a literal brain surgeon, but I'm not 100% sure on that. He, from his experience and from sort of witnessing this thing, he felt that with better protective gear, things like that could be, tragedies like that could be avoided or at least reduced. So from knowing a little bit about the history, I think from there a lot of research, a lot of testing later led to the creation of the Leatt brace, which was one of the sort of first neck braces for this purpose. And this approach of sort of identifying the causes of injuries and designing gear to mitigate it continues to this day, with their product lines expanding beyond the neck brace to essentially all body protection. And we've had a great relationship with Leatt over the years, and they've really always been keen to hear our feedback on the products and work with us on that. I'm not claiming that I've sort of contributed anything to the development of their products at all, but I will say that in the conversation I've always had with them, their interest has always been around ensuring that we have the right products, the right kit, and that people are, and it's working well for people. I've never had a conversation with them about selling more of their product or anything like that. Like I say, I genuinely believe that they're sort of passionate about what their products do. And that is first and foremost what the company's about, which is why I say I've loved working with them. Anyway, I think, that's enough of me gushing specifically over Leatt. I say they're a great company with great products, but ultimately I don't really care which brand you go for. Just make sure you invest in some decent quality protection gear. Like I say, at the very least, it will mean you get more riding and less time sat in our medical room. Just for the legal perspective, because I know that YouTube can be a bit funny when it comes to sponsored content, so I am going to mark this video as sponsored, just to avoid any issues with that. But this is all my own thoughts. Leatt hasn't had any input into this, nor do they have any sort of editorial control over it. I'm really keen to work with Leatt again in the future when the park reopens, but ultimately at this point there's nothing that would stop me from bad-mouthing them if I wanted to. I just have no reason to. Like I say, I think they're a great company with great products, and if you're looking for gear, you can't go far wrong with them. So anyway, I hope you found that a little bit interesting. Obviously it's a hugely complicated and difficult subject which I could spend probably many hours talking about, but I won't bore you that much. I just wanted to give you a little bit of sort of feedback on that side of things, and also just try and get the message out there that protection gear is good. Anyway, thanks again for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. There will be more content coming out, particularly regarding the future of the parks. If you're interested in that, make sure you're following us. And other than that, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.